This Morning in America. Live from the Bulova Studios, here's Bill.
Did I actually request a whole morning of George Strait's music to hear one song, and it turns out to be by Johnny Paycheck? Afraid so. Okay, anyway. Here's someone I really like, really admire, and you should too. You probably already do, and that's Tim Pawlenty, the governor of the great state of Minnesota. Sorry about those Vikings.
Well, we're in mourning here, Bill, and of course you're old enough to remember our 4 Super Bowl appearances and many NFC championship games that didn't go our way, so we got a little football PTSD going on in Minnesota.
I know. I'm sorry, but the first one that was the Kansas City Chiefs against Joe Cap, and, well, you're too young to remember that.
No, I remember.
Okay.
I remember that very well, Hank Stram and the whole deal. But, hey, by the way, are you a George Strait fan, the King?
Yes.
And you can't get your music on your own show?
Yeah.
You got to take charge, man. You got to be like Al Haig. You got to come out and announce.
I'm in charge here.
In charge here.
We have a staff of 4, and that's my number. You know, it's the way it is sometimes. So that's why I go home, so I can be 5th. Anyway.
Exactly.
Tim, I caught you earlier. I love that comment. Our goal in foreign policy is not to be popular in Europe. That's been one of our problems, hasn't it, in the last year?
I think the president has made one of his tactical or strategic goals is to be better liked, and that's interesting. But, frankly, I don't care, Bill, whether we're popular in Europe or other places around the world. The measure of our national security policy should be whether our people and our country and our allies are more safe and more secure. And President Obama, I think, is straining to be well-liked, and we want to be well-secured and well-protected, and those two things aren't necessarily the same.
Yeah, and he's got to call things by the proper name. I don't know if you caught it with so much going on, but did you happen to notice the Pentagon report on Major Hassan there at Fort Hood?
I did.
Not one time did the word Islam or Muslim or radical Islam, perversion of Islam, I don't care how they put it, but, I mean, it's not as if it wasn't relevant to what happened there.
Yeah, words matter, and they have meaning, and you should call them what they are. And on a similar note, Bill, he continues to refrain from the phrase war on terror. There's a number of legal experts who say he may be doing that because if you don't call it a war, then you don't have to deal with the extraordinary powers that the president has under war circumstances.
Yes, sir.
And he's maybe trying to placate the left and people like the ACLU around some of these containment and interrogation issues under the war powers of the president by avoiding invoking them or even calling it a war on terror.
Tim Pawlenty, I want to get to the State of the Union. I know you have things to say about that, but another interesting dimension this morning, I saw yesterday a letter from 5 people saying, let's get the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed thing back to a military commission. Interestingly, 2 of them are Democratic senators, Blanche Lincoln and Jim Webb. Democrats now publicly coming out and criticizing and disagreeing with the president. That was one of the effects of Scott Brown, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, and I know that there's a strain within his party that is just so politically militant on these issues.
Yeah.
He may be trying to placate them, but just financially, from a security standpoint, from a fairness standpoint, the notion that we're going to put that individual, that terrorist, in New York City and put him in a civil court of law and incur all of the risk and financial burdens and I think just misguided prosecution of him in a civil context as opposed to a military context is just bad on so many levels, Bill. It's almost incomprehensible, but he seems bent on pushing forward with it. Very disappointing.
Let's talk about tonight and the State of the Union. The question a lot of our audience has this morning, we talked to Paul Ryan, you know how good he is on this stuff.
He's terrific.
But let me get your take on it, too. They said, well, the freeze, that's a good thing, isn't it? And we have a triple asterisk. But what's your view?
Well, triple asterisk is a good way to put it. I mean, basically, Bill, it's like eating 3 big, fat, juicy mayo-ridden Big Macs and then feeling bad about your weight issues and saying, okay, I'll have a Diet Coke instead of a regular Coke to go with it. It's symbolic.
It's exactly what I do, Tim. It's exactly what I do.
Number 5, big and tasty yesterday. I went no cheese and no mayo, but I did have the full Mr. Pibb and the big supersized.
You can afford it. You can afford it. I can't. Go ahead, sir.
I did, but the big and tasty is not bad, by the way. But so it's symbolic and it's a small step, and I'm sure it's a reaction to getting this can kicked in Massachusetts, but at least he's acknowledging the problem rhetorically. We've got a very different view of how he should deal with it substantively, but at the very least, if you believe that the first step on the road to recovery is admitting you have a problem, he's at least rhetorically admitting the problem. He's not really addressing it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be much more aggressive. He should be extending the Bush tax cuts. He should be not talking about freezing spending but cutting it. He should get back to the table on health care and do it on a bipartisan, market-oriented basis. And then we should pass a constitutional amendment or at least get much more aggressive about the spending. It is out of control, Bill, as you know.
Yeah, Governor Pawlenty, I don't follow the budget stuff so clearly. It's so intricate and complicated, but I do know Congressional Budget Office now has revised the number on the stimulus to $868 billion. And he says, okay, $250 billion will be saved by this freeze. That's still, $250 from $868 leaves a lot.
And that's over 10 years, I think. But
right, you're right.
The thing that this is most interesting to me, Bill. The federal government, all revenues, all sources, takes in $2.2 trillion a year. And, of course, they spent about $3.7 last year. We all talk about the deficit in 1 year being $1.5 trillion. But then we have the debt now going up to $14 trillion. But the thing that most people don't even realize or talk about is the total unfunded liabilities of the United States federal government, all in on pensions, entitlements, and everything, is $65 trillion on a revenue base of $2.2 trillion. That $65 trillion in unfunded liabilities went up $8 trillion just last year. So 1 year's increase in the total unfunded liabilities for the federal government is more than 3 times our total revenues. That's more than 30-to-1 leverage, $2.2 trillion, $65 trillion in unfunded liabilities. There's no mathematical way, set aside whether you're Republican, a Democrat, conservative, liberal, just on basic math, there is no way they can make this work.
How do you view this politically? What's happened in the last year? The chickens have come home to roost, obviously, but I said, look, he promised to be a transformational president, and he hasn't. For one, two, the promise.
The Republicans to win Ted Kennedy's seat, that's transformational.
I guess it is, and not the way he intended.
Sorry.
But is that it? Is it mostly the disillusionment in the middle of a lot of people who thought he would govern centrist?
I think that's right. You got independents or people who are soft, center left, center right, who had hopes, at least wanted some vague notion of change, but then they're now seeing him govern and lead as a doctrinaire liberal on his policies. I think a lot of them still like him personally, but they see his policies as really rigid doctrinaire liberal spending binge-oriented policies, and they're saying with exclamation mark in Massachusetts, enough.
Yeah, and one thing we saw, Tim, you're a student of American politics. I'd never quite seen it like this before. The pitching in all over the country. We had hundreds of people who listen to this show pitching in for Massachusetts, sending money, doing phone calls, calling their friends and relatives and so on as a part of a national effort. This is partly an outgrowth of the Tea Party and the other activities as well.
Well, I think it's an awakening of the country. And
yeah.
You're seeing the country, not just Massachusetts was the barometer or the referendum, but the country waking up and saying, hey, this is not how this country's supposed to run. We're supposed to have respect and encouragement for the private market. We should be focused on doing things that relate to the main issue, which is jobs and the private economy. And I think from a macroeconomic standpoint, Bill, you have an administration and a president and a Congress that doesn't understand that when you take a dollar from the private economy, you're not creating new wealth. You're just bringing it into government and redistributing it. Government doesn't create wealth. All it does is extract something from a taxpayer or a business, bring it into a bureaucracy, take some money and overhead, and then push it back out into political agendas. That's not net wealth creation. All they're doing is transferring money, and it's not working.
If you could choose only one, depressurize individual taxes or corporate, which one would you choose? Where's the biggest bind right now?
Well, I think the quickest and fastest way to stimulate this economy, there's lots of things we could do, but if I had to be limited to one choice to do something most impactful, most quickly, I would cut the payroll tax for both employers and employees immediately and get cash in both their pockets, and you could do that very quickly. Bill, you could have given, for the money they spent in the stimulus, in the TARP, in the bailouts, in the monetary policy, through the Fed, they gave away more than the entire revenue take in the country. You know, that they could have given a tax holiday for every taxpayer, every business for an entire year for the money that they've spent trying to re-stimulate the economy. That would have ignited the economy.
On the payroll tax or all taxes?
All taxes. But
really?
The payroll thing, by the way, is easy to do, and it would put money in people's pockets very quickly.
Governor, thank you very much. Stay close.